It was a quiet afternoon in my garden when my son and daughter-in-law pulled up, suitcases spilling from their car. They'd sold the house I helped them buy, blown every penny, and now expected to move in. My heart sank, but a quiet resolve settled within me. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect. Follow my story to see how I handled their audacious request. Like, share, and let me know where you're listening from. The afternoon sun dappled through the leaves of the old oak tree, painting shifting patterns on Eleanor's carefully tended rose bushes. At 64, she found immense solace in her garden, a sanctuary of vibrant color and gentle fragrance. The scent of honeysuckle mingled with the rich earth as she pruned a wayward branch, humming a soft tune. Retirement had been kind, allowing her the luxury of these quiet, sun-drenched moments. This peaceful routine was abruptly shattered by the screech of tires on her gravel driveway. Eleanor straightened up, hand instinctively going to her chest. Julian's large SUV, usually a beacon of familiarity, now seemed to arrive with an alarming urgency, kicking up a plume of dust that settled on her pristine hydrangeas. It pulled up much too close to the house, almost haphazardly, and before she could even process the unusual speed, the doors flew open. Julian, her son, stepped out, followed by Serena, his wife. They stood on her porch, a tableau of strained faces and discomfort, practically swallowed by an intimidating number of suitcases. Luggage of varying sizes, from oversized trunks to designer carry-ons, formed a small mountain around them. Her heart gave a curious lurch. This wasn't a casual visit. This felt definitive. Julian's eyes, usually so clear and open, were clouded with an unfamiliar weariness, almost shame. Serena, typically impeccably put together, looked rumpled, her usually sharp features softer, more vulnerable. But vulnerability quickly gave way to a hardened edge as she noticed Eleanor observing them. Julian took a deep, shaky breath, his gaze meeting hers with a forced solemnity. Eleanor's pruning shears felt heavy in her hand. She walked towards them, a sense of foreboding tightening its grip. Julian? Serena? What on earth is going on? What's with all the luggage? She gestured towards the heap of belongings with a faint tremor in her hand. Julian hesitated, glancing nervously at Serena before speaking, his words tumbling out in a rush, as if to get them over with. We sold it, Mom. The house. Our house. On Maple Street. The shears clattered to the ground, the sound sharp in the sudden stillness. Eleanor stared, her mind struggling to catch up. Maple Street. The house. Their first house. The one she had poured her heart and a substantial chunk of her life savings into. $40,000. It had been. A gift from her late husband's pension, given when they were struggling to make the down payment all those years ago. It was meant to be their fresh start, a secure foundation. For her, it represented a legacy, a piece of her family's future. You sold the house? She repeated, the words tasting like ash. Without a word? To me? The accusation hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. Serena, however, was quick to deflate the moment. She shifted her weight, a handbag clutched tightly in her hand. Her voice, when it came, was cool, almost dismissive. We didn't need permission, Bessie. It's our house. The use of her full first name, Bessie, a nickname she disliked and only her late husband had been allowed to use, felt like a deliberate jab, a cold reminder of their perceived autonomy. Eleanor felt a slow burn ignite within her. She ignored the sting of Serena's disrespect, focusing on the practical. How much did you get for it? She asked, her voice surprisingly steady, considering the whirlwind of emotions inside her. And where exactly are you moving to? Julian cleared his throat, avoiding her gaze. $620,000, Mom. It went fast. He paused, a visible struggle playing out on his face. And as for where we're moving, well, that's part of the conversation. We were hoping to stay here with you. Just temporarily, of course. The audacity of it, the sheer presumption, took Eleanor's breath away. Over $600,000, gone. And now they expected her, in her modest, comfortable home, to take them in. It was a scenario so preposterous, so utterly unbelievable, that she almost laughed, but the strain on Julian's face kept her silent. $620,000? Eleanor mused aloud, her voice still quiet, but with an underlying steel that neither of them seemed to notice. That's a considerable sum. Where did it all go? Serena, ever eager to justify, stepped forward, a faint smile playing on her lips. Well, Bessie, there were expenses. You know, settling in. We needed new jewelry, of course. My wardrobe was completely out of date. I treated myself to a long overdue spa trip, and Julian finally got his car detailed properly. She ticked off each item on her fingers as if listing essential groceries. And then, of course, we paid off the credit cards. Julian winced at the last statement. He stepped forward slightly, his voice hushed, as if confiding a secret. Serena had about $80,000 in credit card debt. Mom, $80,000. Eleanor felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. That was a small house in itself, but it didn't add up to $620,000. Not even close, Julian continued, clearly struggling with each confession. And then, Serena. She wanted to redecorate her sister's house. As a surprise, and she bought a new car for her mother, too. Eleanor blinked. Her own mother-in-law, yes, but a new car? The sheer extravagance was mind-boggling, a stark contrast to their current position on her porch, begging for shelter. Serena, catching Julian's words, interjected, a slight edge in her tone. It's a boutique, very high-end. Such potential. She looked at Eleanor, as if expecting approval for her shrewd business acumen. Invest? Eleanor echoed, her voice barely a whisper. Serena's smile broadened, a self-satisfied expression. Oh, a substantial amount, Bessie. $300,000. It's going to be huge. I just know it. $300,000, added to the $80,000 in debt, the clothes, the jewelry, the spa trips, the redecorating, the new car for her mother, the car detailing. It clicked into place with a sickening thud. The entire $620,000. It was gone. Every single penny. And they stood before her, not just broke, but absolutely destitute, expecting her to open her home, her sanctuary, to them. A wave of disbelief, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal washed over Eleanor. They were utterly, completely ruined, and they were now her problem. The sun continued its slow descent, but the warmth had long since drained from the afternoon. Eleanor stood on her porch, the implications of Serena's casual pronouncements settling over her like a heavy shroud. $620,000. Gone. Blown on whims, on someone else's sister's decor, on a phantom investment, and on erasing a debt Julian himself seemed barely aware of. It wasn't just irresponsible. It was a brazen act of self-destruction, carried out with an alarming disregard for the future, or for the very people who had helped them to begin with. A deep breath steadied Eleanor's resolve. The initial shock gave way to a quiet, unwavering certainty. Her home, her sanctuary, would not become a refuge for such reckless entitlement. She looked at the mountain of designer luggage, then at their expectant faces. No, Eleanor said, the single word cutting through the tense silence. Her voice was calm, but firm, leaving no room for negotiation. You can't stay here. Julian's face, already etched with worry, crumbled instantly. His shoulders slumped, and a sound, halfway between a sigh and a sob, escaped him. It was the sound of a man defeated, broken by circumstances he seemed powerless to control. He looked like a lost boy, not the confident man she knew him to be. Serena's reaction was starkly different. Her initial look of disbelief morphed into something cold and calculating, the carefully constructed facade of a woman of means, despite her obvious distress, cracked, revealing a flicker of raw anger beneath. Her lips thinned, and her eyes, usually so bright, narrowed to slits. What do you mean, no? Serena demanded, her voice sharp, rising in pitch. It was a business decision, Bessie. A calculated risk. That's how the world works. Eleanor met her gaze directly, unflinching. It wasn't a business decision, Serena. It was reckless spending. Spending on luxuries and others, while leaving yourselves with nothing. And now you expect me to pay the price for your recklessness? Julian tried to interject, his voice thick with desperation. Mom, please. Serena's family. They don't have any room right now. Her sister's place is full, and her mother's, well, you know how small her apartment is. The irony was not lost on Eleanor. Her sister's place, the one Serena just redecorated? She asked, a brow arching. And her mother's, who just received a new car, courtesy of the house sale? Serena scoffed, a dismissive wave of her hand. Oh, please. A little paint and some new cushions don't exactly create extra bedrooms. And my mother deserved that car. She's worked hard her whole life. Unlike some people, she actually appreciates nice things. Her gaze swept around Eleanor's living room, a space Eleanor cherished but was admittedly modest. You've lived in this tiny house your whole life, Bessie. You don't know what it's like to have standards, to want more than this. Eleanor felt a sudden surge of heat, a sharp sting of insult. This tiny house was her home, filled with memories and love, a testament to a life lived with careful frugality and quiet dignity. But she refused to lower herself to Serena's level of petty vitriol. You're right, Serena, Eleanor retorted, her voice dangerously calm, the steel returning. I don't know what it's like to spend other people's money with such abandon, while expecting them to provide me with housing because of my own extravagant mistakes. She then turned her focus to Julian, her son, who had remained largely silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. Julian, she pressed, her voice softer, but no less insistent. Whose idea was it? Really? The house sale? The investment? Paying off $80,000 in debt you apparently knew nothing about? Julian squirmed, visibly uncomfortable under her direct gaze. He stammered. Well, Mom, Serena, she's very persuasive. She has big ideas. I thought it was for the best. She said this boutique was a sure thing. His answers were weak, hollow, revealing his complete capitulation to Serena's will. Serena, however, bristled at Julian's hesitation. She stepped forward, her eyes blazing, a cruel smirk twisting her features. He hit the lottery when he married me, Bessie. He knows it. I bring excitement, opportunity. I show him what a real life looks like, not this dreary existence you've always settled for. The words were like daggers, aimed not just at Eleanor, but at the entire life she had built. The quiet dignity, the hard work, the love for her family, all dismissed as a dreary existence. The disrespect was palpable, unbearable. You're just a bitter old woman, Serena shrieked, her voice rising to a fever pitch, cracking with undisguised venom. You're jealous, that's what it is. Jealous because Julian loves me more than he loves his pathetic, lonely mother. Eleanor felt a cold wave wash over her, numbing the sharp edges of the pain. Pathetic and lonely. The words hung in the air, echoing the depth of Serena's contempt. It was a vicious, cruel attack, designed to inflict maximum pain. And for a moment, it did. But then, a fierce, protective anger surged through Eleanor. This was her home, her peace, and this woman was violating it with every hateful word. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, taking another deep breath. When she opened them, her gaze was unyielding, fixed on Serena. Her voice, though quiet, was filled with a power that vibrated through the air. Get out of my house. Serena's tirade stopped abruptly. Her mouth snapped shut, then opened again in a gasp of disbelief. You can't throw us out. We have nowhere to go. You're his mother. Julian, finally looking up, his eyes wide with fear, stumbled towards Eleanor. Mom, please, reconsider. Just for a few nights. We'll figure something out. We promise. His hands reached out, begging. But Eleanor stood firm, a statue of resolute defiance. My answer is final, she stated, her voice unwavering. You cannot stay here. The silence that followed Eleanor's final refusal was thick, heavy with unspoken tension. Julian stood frozen, his face a mask of pleading and despair. Serena, however, was far from subdued. Her eyes, still blazing with fury, darted around the porch, taking in the stacks of luggage, then settling on Eleanor's unwavering stance. A calculation, cold and sharp, flickered behind her gaze. With a dramatic huff, Serena Mitchell whirled around, grabbed one of the smaller, more decorative suitcases, and stomped towards the open front door. She yanked it wider, then paused, her gaze sweeping across Eleanor's quiet street. It was late afternoon, the time when neighbors were often outside, tending gardens, walking dogs, or simply enjoying the evening air. Mrs. Albright was watering her petunias 2 houses down, and the Miller children were playing quietly in their front yard across the street. Taking a deep breath, Serena launched into her performance. "Can you believe this?" she shrieked, her voice carrying easily down the street. "My own mother-in-law! Throwing her son out, her own flesh and blood." Her voice cracked theatrically, and she even managed to squeeze out a few calculated tears, letting them trickle down her cheeks for maximum effect. Eleanor felt a wave of mortification wash over her. Her quiet, respectable neighborhood was now a stage for Serena's dramatics. Mrs. Albright stopped watering, her hose falling silent. The Miller children paused their game, their innocent faces turned towards the unfolding spectacle. Other curtains twitched in nearby houses. Heads popped up, curious eyes watching the scene unfold. This was exactly what Serena wanted: public humiliation. Eleanor stepped forward onto the porch, her voice low but clear. "That's enough, Serena." The words were meant to quell the storm, to restore some semblance of privacy and dignity, but Serena, fueled by her audience, simply whirled around, her eyes wide with feigned outrage. "Enough? You call this enough? You're so selfish, Bessie. So utterly selfish. You're just embarrassed, aren't you? Embarrassed that everyone is seeing what a heartless old woman you truly are." The accusation hung in the air, but before Eleanor could even formulate a response, Serena's hand shot out. It happened so quickly, so unexpectedly, that Eleanor barely registered the movement. A sharp, stinging blow landed squarely across her cheek, the force of it snapping her head to the side. The sound of the slap was shockingly loud in the sudden, absolute silence of the neighborhood. Mrs. Albright dropped her hose. The Miller children froze. Every single eye was fixed on Eleanor, who staggered back, her hand flying to her burning cheek. The pain was immediate, a throbbing ache that spread through her face, but it was overshadowed by the sheer, bewildering shock. Eleanor looked to Julian, who stood a few feet away, his face a picture of confusion and overwhelming helplessness. His mouth was slightly agape, his eyes wide, but he made no move towards his wife, no attempt to defend his mother. He simply stood there, an inert witness, offering no solace, no protection. "Did you just hit me?" Eleanor asked, her voice a strained whisper, her mind struggling to process the reality of what had just happened. Serena, her chest heaving, her eyes still wild, spat back, "You deserved it, you old hag. You deserved it for being so cruel." Eleanor's hand still pressed against her cheek, which was beginning to throb intensely. Humiliation, hot and searing, washed over her, compounded by the silent, watchful eyes of her neighbors. She looked past Serena, past Julian, at the stunned onlookers. Then, she spoke directly to Julian, her voice clear and strong despite the tremor in her hands. "Julian, your wife just assaulted me." In front of the entire neighborhood, her gaze then shifted back to Serena, unwavering. "You have 5 minutes. 5 minutes to get your bags and get off my property. Or I will call the police." Serena's cruel smirk returned, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "Oh, please, you wouldn't dare. You wouldn't dare call the police on your own son and daughter-in-law, in front of all these people." She gestured wildly at the silent neighbors, as if inviting them to share in her incredulity. Eleanor, however, did not flinch. Her hand, though trembling slightly, reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved with surprising speed and precision, dialing the 3 familiar digits. She held the phone to her ear, her eyes still locked with Serena's. "Yes, hello, I'd like to report a trespasser," Eleanor stated calmly into the phone, her voice steady. "They are on my property, refusing to leave, and have become violent. Yes, I just sustained an assault. My address is 1422 Oakwood Lane." Serena's face, which had been set in a sneer of defiance, suddenly paled. Her eyes widened in genuine panic. "No! Bessie, wait! What are you doing?" She grabbed Julian's arm, shaking him. "Julian, tell her to stop." But Eleanor, ignoring their frantic pleas, continued her conversation with the dispatcher, providing the necessary details, her voice never wavering, never betraying the pain or the terror she felt. She gave a concise, factual account of what had transpired, her eyes still fixed on Serena. When she finally ended the call, she lowered the phone, her gaze still burning into Serena's. "I called the police," Eleanor stated, her voice devoid of emotion, yet carrying the weight of absolute resolve. "I called the police on the woman who just assaulted me in front of witnesses." The wail of sirens, faint at first, then growing steadily louder, pierced the strained silence of Oakwood Lane. Within 10 minutes of Eleanor's call, a patrol car pulled up to her curb, lights flashing, casting an eerie blue and red glow over the anxious faces of the neighbors. Officers Ramirez and Davis, both young and professional, emerged from the vehicle, their demeanor calm but authoritative. Officer Ramirez, a tall woman with sharp, observant eyes, approached Eleanor first. "Ma'am, we received a report of an assault. Are you Eleanor?" Eleanor, her hand still gently pressed to her throbbing cheek, nodded. "Yes, officer, that's me." She gestured towards Serena, who stood defiantly beside Julian, still reeling from the shock of the police presence. "And is this the individual who assaulted you?" Officer Ramirez asked, her gaze sweeping from Eleanor to Serena. "Yes," Eleanor affirmed. Officer Davis, a burly man, moved towards Julian and Serena. "Ma'am, did you strike her?" he asked Serena directly. Serena, ever the performer, managed to regain some of her composure. "She was being completely unreasonable, throwing us out of her house. After everything we've been through, it was just a misunderstanding, an emotional moment." Eleanor met Julian's eyes, a silent plea for him to speak the truth, to stand up for her. But Julian, still shell-shocked, remained silent, his gaze fixed on the ground. His inaction solidified Eleanor's resolve. "Yes, I want to press charges," Eleanor stated firmly, her voice clear. At that moment, Mrs. Albright, emboldened by the officer's presence, stepped forward from her lawn. "Excuse me, officer," she called out, her voice a little shaky but determined. "I saw the whole thing. She hit Bessie right across the face, unprovoked. It was awful." Other neighbors mumbled in agreement, their silence having been broken. Serena's composure faltered once more. "This is ridiculous. It's a family dispute. You can't just arrest me for a family matter." Officer Ramirez gave her a steady, unimpressed look. "Ma'am, assault is assault, regardless of family ties." She then turned to Officer Davis. "Take Miss Mitchell into custody." Serena's eyes widened, a fresh wave of panic washing over her. "No, you can't. Julian, do something." She lunged for Julian's arm, her fingers digging in, but he remained utterly frozen, a spectator in his own life's drama. He offered no protest, no defense, nothing. Officer Davis gently but firmly took Serena's arm, guiding her towards the patrol car. "You have the right to remain silent," he began, as Serena continued to protest, her words fading into a frustrated mumble as the car door closed behind her. Julian watched her go, his face pale, his body rigid. Once the door clicked shut, he slowly turned to Eleanor, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and accusation. "Mom," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Did you really have to do that?" Eleanor looked at her son, the man she had loved and nurtured, who had just witnessed his wife strike her, and still asked such a question. "Did I have to, Julian?" she echoed, her voice tinged with a weariness that went bone deep. "She assaulted me. In front of our neighbors. And you stood there, silent. You offered no defense, no protection for your own mother." Officer Davis, after ensuring Serena was secured, approached Eleanor. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. Detective Harrison will be there to take your account." Eleanor nodded. "Of course, officer. I'll be there." As the officers conferred briefly, Julian began the slow, agonizing process of loading his luggage back into his SUV. Each suitcase seemed heavier than the last, each movement stiff and robotic. He looked utterly lost, defeated. Eleanor watched him for a moment, a flicker of the mother she once was, before Serena's influence surfacing. "Julian," she said, her voice softer now, tinged with a fragile hope, "if you leave her, if you admit that this whole situation is wrong, we can work through this. You're still my son. We can find a way to rebuild, to get you back on your feet." It was a lifeline, a final chance. Julian paused, his hands on the handle of a large trunk. He turned to her, his eyes still clouded. "She's my wife, Mom." Eleanor felt a fresh wave of disappointment, but it was no longer surprising. "She abandoned you, Julian," Eleanor countered, her voice firm once more. "Financially, emotionally, she spent every penny you had, put you in this impossible situation, and then expected me to clean up her mess. And you still choose to stand by her." Julian offered no response, simply closed the trunk with a thud and got into the driver's seat. He started the engine, backed out of the driveway, and drove away, leaving a lingering scent of exhaust fumes and a profound sense of despair in his wake. At the police station, Eleanor recounted the events to Detective Harrison, a seasoned officer with kind but penetrating eyes. She detailed not just the physical assault, but the deeper, more insidious manipulation that had been at play for years. She spoke of Serena's constant need for control, her expensive tastes, and her insidious way of isolating Julian from his family, particularly from his mother. "She has no concept of living within her means, Detective," Eleanor explained, her voice steady. "And Julian, bless his heart, he was always too trusting, too eager to please. She squandered over $600,000, every penny from the sale of their house, on jewelry, clothes, spa trips, paying off $80,000 of her credit card debt, redecorating her sister's house, buying her mother a new car, and investing $300,000 in a friend's boutique. And now they have nothing." As she spoke, a distant memory resurfaced. A small, yet significant detail from years ago. The down payment. Her $40,000. She had insisted on a promissory note, a simple document, signed by both Julian and Serena, acknowledging the loan and its repayment terms. It was a condition her late husband had advised, a practical safeguard, even for family. It was secured by the property itself, a spark of something akin to hope, or perhaps righteous indignation, ignited within her. The promissory note. It wasn't just a memory. It was a legally binding document. "Detective," Eleanor said, a newfound resolve in her voice. "I remember something. When I helped them with their down payment years ago, I had them sign a promissory note. It was secured by the house. I need to get it." After giving her statement, Eleanor returned home, retrieved the official-looking envelope from her safe deposit box, and immediately called her attorney, Arthur Finch. If you're finding this story as unbelievable as I am, don't miss a single moment of what happens next. Make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to stay updated. Let's see how this unfolds. The morning sun, usually a source of comfort, felt strangely indifferent as Eleanor walked into Arthur Finch's office. Her attorney, a kind-faced man with a shrewd legal mind, had been a trusted advisor since her husband's passing. She sat across from him, the promissory note clutched in her hand, and recounted the entire, unbelievable ordeal. From the sudden arrival of Julian and Serena, their audacious request, the shocking revelation of their financial ruin, to Serena's public outburst and the humiliating slap. Arthur listened patiently, his expression grave, interjecting only with an occasional question. When Eleanor finished, a profound silence settled over the room, broken only by the gentle ticking of a clock on his wall. Arthur picked up the promissory note, examining it carefully. "Bessie," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "This changes things significantly. This isn't just a verbal agreement or a handshake loan. This promissory note, clearly stating the $40,000 principal, the interest rate, and specifically tying it to the Maple Street property as a lien, gives you significant legal recourse." Eleanor felt a faint glimmer of hope, a spark in the darkness. "What does that mean, Arthur?" "It means," he explained, leaning forward, "that when they sold the house without repaying you, or even informing you, they committed a breach of contract. Furthermore, by selling an asset against which you held a lien and failing to compensate you, they've also committed what's known as conversion of secured property. Effectively, they stole from you, Bessie, from an asset that was legally partially yours." Eleanor flinched at the word stole, but the legal implications were clear. "We can sue for the original $40,000, Arthur continued, plus any accrued interest as stipulated in the note. We can also seek damages for their actions, including legal fees, and potentially even punitive damages, given the circumstances of the assault and the public humiliation, depending on what other assets they might possess. Though it sounds like they have little liquid cash, we could seek to attach those." Arthur paused, meeting Eleanor's eyes. "Sometimes, Bessie," he said, his voice softer, "the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their own actions. Enabling them only allows the destructive cycle to continue." Eleanor absorbed his words. They resonated deeply with her growing conviction. She had spent years trying to help Julian, to gently steer him, only to watch Serena pull him further into a web of irresponsibility. Her son, once so vibrant and independent, had become a shadow, a willing accomplice in his own demise. After a long moment of reflection, a quiet strength settled over Eleanor. "Arthur," she said, her voice firm and resolute, "I want you to file the lawsuit against both Julian and Serena." Leaving Arthur's office, Eleanor felt a strange mix of sadness and empowerment. Her first action was to call a locksmith. Within the hour, her old locks were replaced with new, more secure ones, and a sophisticated security system was installed. A sense of physical safety, at least, began to return. Later that afternoon, her phone rang. It was Julian. His voice was subdued, laced with desperation. "Mom," he said, "Serena made bail. She's really upset. She wants to talk." "We both do." "There's nothing to talk about, Julian," Eleanor replied, her voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil within her. "I've just come from my attorney's office." A beat of silence. Then Julian's voice, hesitant. "For the promissory note, Julian," Eleanor stated calmly. "The $40,000 you and Serena signed for when I helped you with the down payment on the Maple Street house. The one you failed to repay, or even acknowledge, when you sold the property." "The note?" Julian sounded genuinely bewildered. "Mom, we didn't think you'd actually... I mean, it was family. Family doesn't squander hundreds of thousands of dollars and then assault their benefactor," Eleanor retorted, her patience wearing thin. "My attorney is filing a lawsuit for that $40,000, plus 3 years of interest, as stipulated in the note, plus legal fees, plus damages. We're looking at around $60,000, Julian." $60,000? Julian gasped. "Mom, that's stealing. We don't have that kind of money." "No, Julian," Eleanor corrected him. "It's not stealing. It's conversion of secured property. And it's the legal consequence of your wife's actions and your complicity. But a payment plan?" he pleaded. "We can set up a payment plan. Please, Mom. We're in trouble. You know we are." You should have thought about a payment plan when you had over $600,000 in your bank account, Julian, Eleanor countered, a touch of bitterness creeping into her voice. You should have thought about the original note. You knew it existed. You just chose to ignore it. Like so many other things. Julian's voice dropped, edged with despair. We're staying in the cheapest motel on the outskirts of town, Mom. We're running out of money for food. Serena. She's not handling this well. Eleanor felt a pang in her heart, but she quickly suppressed it. This was not the time for sentimentality. This was the time for tough love, for an ultimatum that needed to be delivered. Julian, Eleanor said, her voice firm, resolute. You need to decide what's more important to you. Your relationship with your wife, or your relationship with your mother, because right now, Julian, you can't have both. 3 days later, the calm Eleanor had tentatively rebuilt was shattered by a phone call from Arthur Finch. His voice, usually so steady, was tinged with a blend of disbelief and anger. Bessie, he began. My investigator has uncovered some disturbing information about Serena. Eleanor braced herself, a cold premonition settling in her stomach. It appears Serena has a distinct pattern of this behavior, he stated. Before Julian, there were 2 other fiancés. In both instances, she systematically used their credit cards, running up significant debts. In one case, it was over $50,000 before the relationship inevitably crumbled. Eleanor felt a sick knot form in her gut. It wasn't just Julian. This was a calculated strategy. And then there's the boutique investment, Arthur continued, his voice hardening. My investigator found no record of any such business at the address Serena provided, nor any legitimate business registration under her friend's name for a venture of that scale. Bessie. The $300,000. It's a fraud. The boutique doesn't exist. The money is just gone. The breath caught in Eleanor's throat. $300,000. A complete fabrication. The audacity of it was staggering. But there's more, Arthur said, his tone softening with what sounded like genuine sympathy. And this is perhaps the most devastating. Serena has been having an affair. For at least 6 months, with a wealthy, married man named Marcus Thorne. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. An affair. All this time, all this deceit, and Julian was unknowingly funding his wife's infidelity. The expensive jewelry, the spa trips, the car detailing. My investigator believes these were all part of maintaining her relationship with this other man. Gifts for herself, appearances for him, Arthur explained. He's a man of significant means, and Serena was clearly accustomed to a certain lifestyle. The investigator's report suggests that Marcus Thorne's wife recently discovered the affair and gave him an ultimatum. She's cut Serena off completely, which, ironically, explains Serena's sudden desperation, her complete lack of funds, and her immediate turn to you. Eleanor sat in stunned silence, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Serena wasn't just irresponsible, she was a predator, a calculating, manipulative woman who had systematically targeted Julian, bled him dry. And then, when her other sources dried up, turned on him and his family. She had not only destroyed his financial future but had also betrayed his trust in the most profound way possible, all while Julian was utterly blind to it. This information, Arthur continued, is incredibly powerful for our lawsuit. We can argue not just breach of contract and conversion, but also fraud and deception. It paints a very clear picture of Serena's intent. Eleanor found her voice, cold and steady. Use it all, Arthur. Every single piece of it. Later that day, the legal papers were served at the motel where Julian and Serena were staying. Not long after, Eleanor's phone rang, and Julian's voice, shaking with a raw, unfamiliar rage, erupted through the receiver. Mom, what is this? $67,000? Are you insane? We got served with papers. A lawsuit for $67,000. How could you do this to us? Julian, Eleanor replied, her voice calm, a stark contrast to his fury. We discussed this. I warned you. I told you that you needed to make a choice. A choice? He spluttered. almost incoherent. You expect me to just abandon my wife? After all we've been through? And now she wants to countersue. For emotional distress, she says you're ruining her life. She wants to countersue? Eleanor almost laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. Julian, tell Serena that my attorney has uncovered some facts she might find inconvenient. There was a moment of silence, then a muffled argument in the background. She could hear Serena's shrill voice, indignant accusations. What facts? Julian demanded, his voice wary now. Eleanor took a deep breath. This was it. The moment of truth. Julian, she said, her voice dropping to a low, deliberate tone. Serena has been having an affair. For at least 6 months. The man is wealthy and married. She's been using your money, the money from the sale of your house, to fund their relationship. Julian's response was immediate, an explosive denial. That's a lie. That's a disgusting, cruel lie. She would never do that. You're just trying to drive us apart. It's not a lie, Julian. Eleanor insisted, her voice unwavering. My investigator has proof. Dates, locations, photographs, the jewelry, the spa trips, the car detailing. They weren't for you, Julian. They were for him, or for maintaining her image for him. Over the phone, Serena's furious denials and fresh accusations became loudly audible, a cacophony of outrage and manufactured tears. She's lying. She's trying to break us up. She's always hated me. Julian, Eleanor said, cutting through the noise. Ask Serena about Marcus Thorne. Ask her to explain him. Eleanor held the phone, listening as Serena's furious accusations and denials faded into a sudden, chilling silence. She could almost picture Julian's face as he turned to Serena, the question of Marcus Thorne hanging in the air between them. The shift from screeching indignation to stunned quiet was instantaneous, deafening. Julian? Eleanor prompted, her voice soft. She heard Julian's voice, now barely a whisper, an echo of the confident man he once was. Mom. What do you know about him? Eleanor knew this was the moment. The truth, delivered with precision, might finally pierce through the veil of Serena's deception. He's 52 years old, Julian. Owns a construction company, drives a black Mercedes. His wife found out about the affair last week, which is why Serena suddenly found herself without her usual, supplemental income. Which is why she came to you, and then to me, so desperate. A sharp, audible gasp came from Julian's end of the line, followed by the distant sound of something crashing to the floor, and Serena's renewed, but now frantic, protests. Then, with a click, the line went dead. Eleanor slowly lowered her phone, her heart aching. She sat in silence, staring out her window at the darkening sky. Had she saved him, finally forcing him to see the truth? Or had she simply pushed him further away, irrevocably broken their bond? The uncertainty was a heavy weight. The next morning, as Eleanor watered her roses, the familiar sound of her phone ringing startled her. It was Arthur. Bessie, he said, his voice tinged with surprise. Julian just called. He wants to meet. With both of us. He sounded different. Eleanor agreed, a flicker of trepidation and hope intertwining within her. When she arrived at Arthur's office, Julian was already there, hunched in a chair, looking utterly ravaged. He was gaunt, his face pale and drawn, as if he had aged a decade overnight. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes sunken and bloodshot, betraying a night of torment. He looked like a stranger, a ghost of the son she knew. He stood as Eleanor entered, but his movements were stiff, hesitant. Mom, he said, his voice hoarse. Thank you for coming. Eleanor simply nodded, taking a seat. Julian turned to Arthur, his voice regaining a semblance of strength, though still raw with pain. Mr. Finch, I need to know. I need to know exactly what my wife has done. I need to see all the evidence. His eyes, though weary, held a newfound clarity, a desperate hunger for the truth. Arthur, with a somber nod, opened a file. He laid out the investigator's findings, piece by damning piece. He started with the meticulously documented affair with Marcus Thorne, presenting photographic evidence, hotel receipts, credit card statements detailing lavish spending on jewelry, and trips that aligned perfectly with the timeline of the affair. He showed Julian the canceled checks and transfers that traced the boutique investment to a defunct P.O. box, and then to Serena's personal accounts, proving the elaborate fraud. He detailed the pattern of financial deception with her previous fiancés, highlighting her calculated manipulation. He even produced copies of Serena's undisclosed credit card statements, clearly showing the $80,000 in debt Julian had been unaware of. Julian listened in horrified silence, shrinking further into his chair with each revelation. His shoulders slumped, his head bowed, and silent tears streamed down his face, carving paths through the dust and grime on his cheeks. He made no sound, no protest, simply absorbed the brutal reality of his shattered life. When Arthur finished, the silence in the room was profound, broken only by Julian's ragged breathing. After a long moment, he finally lifted his head, his eyes meeting Eleanor's, filled with an anguish so deep it was almost unbearable. "My whole life," Julian confessed, his voice choked with emotion. "Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my wife, it's all been a lie. A complete and utter fabrication." He rubbed his face roughly, trying to stem the flow of tears. "I'm so sorry, Mom. So incredibly sorry. For all of it. For not listening to you, for choosing her over you, for being so blind, so stupid, for not seeing the signs." Eleanor's heart ached for him, a deep, maternal pain. The sight of her son, so utterly broken, was almost too much to bear. Arthur, seeing Julian's distress, began to speak. "Julian, we can discuss a payment plan for the money owed to your mother. Given your current circumstances." Julian, however, interrupted him, shaking his head. "No," he said, his voice firm, tinged with a new, quiet determination. "Mom deserves to be paid back. Immediately. Every single penny." He looked at Eleanor, his gaze unwavering. "I will take out a personal loan, Mom. I will work extra hours. I will do whatever it takes. You will be repaid. Every single cent." He paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath, then looked from Eleanor to Arthur, his face set with a grim resolve. "And Mom," he declared, his voice clear despite its raw edge, "I want you to know that I'm filing for divorce today." Julian filed for divorce the very next day. 3 days later, Eleanor's peaceful morning was shattered by a furious pounding on her front door at precisely 6 a.m. The new security system chirped, announcing an intruder at the entrance. Peering through the video screen, Eleanor saw Serena, her hair disheveled, her face contorted with rage. "You destroyed my marriage!" Serena screamed, her voice hoarse, echoing through the quiet street. "You meddling old hag! You just couldn't stand to see him happy, could you?" Eleanor, safe and secure behind her reinforced door, activated the intercom. "Serena, you need to leave my property immediately. I'm calling the police." Serena merely intensified her assault on the door, her pounding growing louder. "Go ahead, call them. Let them see what kind of monster you are. The woman who hired private investigators to spy on her own son. You're a sick, twisted old woman." Her public outburst, once again, drew the attention of startled neighbors. She began to reveal intimate family details, twisting them into accusations against Eleanor, painting herself as the victim of a ruthless, manipulative mother-in-law. Within minutes, Officer Ramirez returned, this time accompanied by Officer Johnson. They moved swiftly, ordering Serena to calm down and step away from the door. Serena, however, was not easily deterred. She dramatically collapsed to her knees on Eleanor's porch, her sobs echoing around the neighborhood. "Please, Bessie," she wailed, her voice cracking. "I have nowhere to go. Julian kicked me out of the motel. He's filing for divorce. What am I supposed to do?" Eleanor watched from her screen, a strange mix of emotions swirling within her. A small, almost imperceptible twinge of sympathy pricked her heart at Serena's raw desperation. But then, the image of Julian's shattered face flashed in her mind, along with the memory of the fabricated boutique, the hidden affair, and the $70,000 in debt. Her resolve hardened instantly. This was the consequence of Serena's own choices made with malice and deception. The officers, growing weary of Serena's theatrics, finally took firm action. They lifted her gently but decisively, guiding her towards their patrol car. "Ma'am," Officer Ramirez warned, "if you return to this property, you will be arrested for trespassing. Do you understand?" Serena, defeated, offered no response, simply allowed herself to be led away. Once the street was quiet again, Eleanor called Julian. He answered on the first ring, his voice still strained. "Mom? Was that Serena at your place?" "Yes." "It was," Eleanor confirmed. She was quite vocal. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Julian said, genuine remorse in his tone. "I told her to stay away from you. I kicked her out of the motel. I couldn't stand to be in the same room with her after everything I found out. All the lies." "Where are you, Julian?" Eleanor asked, her maternal concern overriding her anger for a moment. "I found a weekly motel, Mom. It's not much, but it's cheap. I'm working overtime, trying to save up money to pay you back. Every penny, I promise." A fragile sense of hope bloomed in Eleanor's heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, Julian was finally seeing clearly. A few days later, Arthur Finch called again. "Bessie, Serena has hired an attorney. On contingency, it seems. They're claiming your lawsuit is harassment and that the promissory note is somehow invalid. They're trying to discredit you." Eleanor sighed. She spent the next few days meticulously compiling all her documentation. Phone records of past conversations, emails exchanging financial information, receipts for other small loans she had given Julian over the years, all carefully organized. She would leave no stone unturned. 2 days before their court date, a new, unexpected confrontation occurred. Eleanor was at her part-time job at the local library, quietly shelving books, when a commotion erupted at the front desk. Serena, dressed in a surprisingly tasteful but cheap dress, stood there, loudly demanding to talk to Eleanor. "Eleanor, I know you're here. We need to talk. We can settle this lawsuit right now." Serena's voice carried through the quiet hum of the library, drawing disapproving glances from patrons. Eleanor walked calmly to the front desk, her expression unreadable. "There's nothing to discuss, Serena. My terms are clear. Pay me the $67,000 you owe me, and I'll drop the suit." Serena's composure cracked, a desperate glint in her eyes. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Oh, I know things, Bessie. Things about your precious son that would surprise you. Things that Terrence hasn't been completely honest with you about everything." Eleanor felt a cold dread ripple through her. Terrence was a distant memory. She quickly corrected Serena in her head, but something about Serena's tone, the implication, sent a shiver down her spine. "What are you talking about, Serena?" Serena simply smiled, a cruel, triumphant smirk. "You'll see. You'll all see." She then turned and walked out, leaving Eleanor with a chilling sense of unease. Later that evening, a trembling Julian called Eleanor. "Mom," he started, his voice barely audible. "Serena, she knows some things. About me. Things I never told you." Eleanor's heart sank. "What things, Julian?" "Years ago," he confessed. "When I bought my first car, I falsified some documents for the loan. And then, when we got the mortgage on Maple Street, I inflated my income on the application, and some of the cash jobs I did, the ones I told you about, I never reported them to the IRS. Serena found out about it all. She kept copies of everything. She called it insurance against me, ever leaving her." The weight of Julian's confession settled heavily on Eleanor. Mortgage fraud, tax evasion, falsified loan documents. These were serious crimes, far beyond mere financial irresponsibility. Her son, her innocent Julian, was embroiled in a legal quagmire that could land him in jail and cost him his job, his future. "Julian," Eleanor urged, her voice tight with fear and urgency. You need to tell Arthur Finch everything. Immediately. But Mom, Julian stammered, his voice thick with terror. I could go to jail. Julian, pale and trembling, did as Eleanor urged. He met with Arthur Finch, pouring out every terrifying detail of his past financial misdeeds. The falsified car loan documents, the inflated income on the mortgage application, the unreported cash income from odd jobs. Arthur listened patiently, his expression serious. When Julian finished, the silence in the office was thick with the weight of his confessions. This is serious, Julian, Arthur finally said, his voice calm, but not insurmountable. The statute of limitations might apply to some of the older offenses, and a voluntary disclosure, especially with your cooperation against Serena, could mitigate the severity of potential charges. It won't be easy, but we have options. Your honesty here is your best defense. Julian nodded, a glimmer of relief in his eyes. He had taken the first step towards true accountability. The day of the court hearing arrived, a crisp autumn morning. Eleanor sat beside Julian in the waiting room, a mixture of nerves and quiet determination swirling within her. Julian, though still thin and etched with worry, carried himself with a new, quiet resolve. Serena, on the other hand, swept in, meticulously dressed, her hair perfect, her eyes carefully wide and tear-filled, playing the part of the wronged victim to perfection. She was accompanied by her attorney, Miss Evelyn Reed, a sharp-faced woman with an air of aggressive confidence. The case was heard by Judge Eleanor Vance, a no-nonsense woman known for her keen intellect and equitable rulings. Miss Reed opened for Serena, painting Eleanor as a vindictive, controlling mother-in-law who harbored a long-standing resentment against her son's wife, fabricating accusations to destroy their marriage and claim unearned money. Arthur Finch then rose, his presence commanding. He methodically laid out the facts for Judge Vance. The undeniable promissory note, the clear terms, the missed payments, the unauthorized sale of the house that secured the loan, and the subsequent physical assault. He presented Eleanor's statement to the police, the photos of her bruised cheek, and the officer's report. Then came the unexpected. Arthur called Marcus Thorne to the stand. Marcus, a grim-faced man, confirmed the affair with Serena, detailed her repeated lies about Julian and their supposed failing marriage, and testified that Serena had indeed used significant sums of money which he had given her to fund a lavish lifestyle. His testimony was damning, painting a clear picture of Serena's systematic deception. Judge Vance, her gaze unwavering, turned directly to Serena. She meticulously questioned her about the promissory note, her signature, and her understanding of her financial obligations. Serena, flustered, tried to dismiss it as family money and a misunderstanding, but the judge swiftly cut through her evasions, reminding her that a signed legal document was not a casual family gift. The judge then addressed the assault. Mrs. Albright, Eleanor's brave neighbor, took the stand, recounting Serena's public outburst and the unequivocal slap. Officers Ramirez and Johnson corroborated the report, describing Serena's behavior and Eleanor's calm, factual account. Finally, Arthur presented the evidence of Serena's lavish spending. Over $600,000 squandered in just 6 months, supported by bank statements, credit card records, and the investigator's report on the non-existent boutique. He concluded with a powerful summation, accusing Serena of systematic fraud, emotional manipulation, and financial abuse. Judge Vance delivered her verdict with a stern, clear voice. She ruled unequivocally in favor of Eleanor, ordering Serena to pay the full $67,000, the original $40,000, accrued interest, and legal fees, within 30 days. Furthermore, citing the evidence of fraud, the judge stated that she would be forwarding the case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal fraud charges against Serena. As Eleanor and Julian left the courtroom, a distraught Serena, her carefully constructed facade crumbling, lunged forward. "This isn't over, Bessie," she hissed, tears streaming down her face, her eyes filled with venom. "You think you've won?" "You haven't." Eleanor met her gaze, her own eyes filled with a quiet strength. "It is over, Serena," she said, her voice calm and firm. "It's been over since the moment you raised your hand to me." 3 months later, Julian called Eleanor, his voice lighter than it had been in years. "Mom," he said, "you won't believe it. Serena's friend, the one from the fake boutique, she was just arrested for fraud. It looks like the DA connected the dots from your case." Julian was doing much better. He had found a new job, a steady one with good pay, and had moved into a small, clean apartment. He was making monthly payments to Eleanor, small but consistent, determined to make this right. He apologized endlessly for his past blindness, and Eleanor, seeing his genuine remorse and efforts, slowly began to forgive him, not just with words, but with her heart. A few weeks after Serena's friend was arrested, Eleanor received a threatening text message from an unknown number, unmistakably from Serena, promising further retaliation. Eleanor, feeling a profound sense of peace and security, simply blocked the number. She knew it was over. A year later, Eleanor made a significant decision. She sold her house on Oakwood Lane, the home of so many memories, both sweet and bitter. She used the equity, combined with her savings, to move to a vibrant retirement community in Arizona. The warm desert air, the endless blue skies, and the gentle pace of life offered a fresh start. Julian visited regularly, his calls no longer filled with desperation, but with updates on his progress and heartfelt expressions of love. One day, while enjoying a community event, Eleanor met a new resident, a kind woman named Cassandra. As they chatted, Cassandra mentioned her sister, Serena. Eleanor's breath caught. It was Serena's sister, the one whose house Serena had redecorated with Julian's money. Cassandra, unaware of Eleanor's identity, spoke of Serena with a mix of exasperation and concern, revealing that Serena was still in Florida, now under a different name, still finding wealthy men to ensnare. Eleanor, feeling a strange mix of vindication and closure, decided to share her story with Cassandra. She recounted the entire saga, the deception, the fraud, the betrayal, and Julian's long, painful awakening. Cassandra listened in stunned silence, finally understanding the depth of her sister's deceit. Eleanor emphasized the importance of documentation, of protecting oneself, and of recognizing the red flags of a manipulator. Looking back, Eleanor realized her journey had not been just about reclaiming money, but about reclaiming her son, and more importantly, reclaiming her own strength. She had faced down betrayal, public humiliation, and profound emotional pain. She had stood firm, protected her boundaries, and in doing so, had ultimately saved Julian from a destructive path. The victory was not just legal, it was deeply personal, a testament to resilience and the enduring power of a mother's love, even when it had to be tough.